Yeah.
Fire away.
Okay, cool. Well, hey, man, it's wonderful to meet you. I appreciate you taking a minute out. I'm looking forward to peeling back the layers of your professional world. So thank you for taking a minute out.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So before we get into your work, I want to know, we're entering a new year, and probably one of the biggest things that happened to us in the last 4.5, 5 years was surviving that pandemic. There was a lot of pivoting, a lot of changes. How much of living through that time period is reverberated into what you do today?
It's funny because it's actually reverberated on or impacted what I do both personally and professionally. And first on the personal side, I'm from Italy. I was born and raised in Italy, and for years I tried to go back whenever I could. It was like vacation, a couple of weeks here and there. And then during the pandemic, for a lot of reasons, not necessarily good ones, but my mom got sick not with COVID, but with something else, and passed away. And my dad decided to move back to Italy permanently. And so I found myself having to spend a lot of time in Italy. And suddenly I realized that, hey, I can actually be anywhere and do my work. And so as a result of that, actually now my father is in a retirement home in Rome and I get to go there. Poor me, I have to split my time between New York and Rome, which is really sucks. It's very difficult, but somebody's got to do it.
That's
And
right.
but also at the same time, the pandemic, is so I work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I've been working in the space for 10 years. And when I started working, I'm a white dude. People are like, "What are you doing working in that space?" And then when George Floyd was murdered during the pandemic, and we're all glued to our TV sets, and everybody was going, crazy about DEI, people are like, "Oh, you're such a genius." But to me, it was actually there were things about it that I didn't really enjoy. I felt that there was going to be backlash, and sure enough, there's the backlash. And so that whole period of the pandemic kind of I think that a lot of the pandemic really highlighted injustices, and I think George Floyd's murder was really kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. But I think that that really has had a profound impact on my entire field. And the fact that right now we're seeing this massive backlash, I think, is a result of this big wave of interest that was, coincidental with the pandemic. And I would argue that it was fueled in part by the fact that, again, we were all kind of like cooped up and we got to see how horrible the conditions were, not only for people like George Floyd, but also for frontline workers. All of a sudden we're all locked up at home and people that are delivering our food and delivering our Amazon supplies and whatever the case might be, they're out there getting COVID and dying, and we need them because they're essential, and yet we still treat them essentially not very well, right? And so there was in both personal and professional ways, I would say the last 4 years have been really pretty amazing, quite a roller coaster.
I remember interviewing a musician around June of 2020, June, July, and it was interesting because he was like, we were already, especially in America, a car teetering off the edge of the cliff. And all we needed were little instances like George Floyd to create a racial and a class war that was just already bubbling, but everybody was at home getting restricted from living their lives, and it just exploded.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And an explosion is a good way to put it. It was really unfortunately, right now, what's happening is a similar kind of explosion, but in the opposite direction. And I feel like the pendulum swung pretty far, pretty fast for a couple of years, and now it's swinging back in the opposite direction even more. And between, and you talk about coincidences, right? But and I mean, who knows whether these are really coincidental or not? But the fact that the whole world has been moving toward a more nationalist, more conservative mindset has really accelerated the pace of this anti-DI backlash right now in ways that I think is, leaving aside my own personal beliefs. I think that right now there is a lot and issues in with fairness and justice and issues of running a good business. They're all together, and it's a pretty explosive, which is really unfortunate because right now a lot of rhetoric, a lot of division that really shouldn't be there. I think that ultimately we're all trying to do the same thing, but sometimes we get caught up in the politics and in the discussions about points that are really not all that interesting, but unfortunately they end up dominating the conversation, and that's what we're seeing right now.
We certainly are. So let's get to the heart and soul of what you do on a daily basis. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids, 10, 11-year-olds. It's career day, and one of the kids in the back of the room is like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer him?
So I help companies figure out how they can make more money by treating their employees better. Basically, it's as simple as that. It's figuring out that if you're running a company, people think of companies, but it's not the building. It's not that, you don't go to, yes, there is a building there, but the company is the collection of all the people that make it up. And if you take away the people from the company ceases to exist. And one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, we're really talking about how are different people experiencing the workplace. And that has an impact not only on the people themselves, but on the company. Because if you have people in your organization that are not happy, they're not going to work as hard. And if they're selling you products and you go to the store and the salesperson is upset because they're not being treated well, then you're going to feel that as a customer, you're going to be less likely to buy the products and make less money. And so to me, it's all about thinking about how do I manage the people in a way that most out of them, not only by making me happy, but also by making me more money. And the two really go hand in hand because if my people are not satisfied, they will make less money for me. They will be more likely to leave and then have to go out and hire new people. So really, that's what it's all about. It's about helping companies make more money by making their employees happier.
On on the business landscape today, who epitomizes that? Delivers a good product, takes care of their employees, has wonderful customer service. Who is that for you?
I would say a couple of companies, and in fact, they're really sticking out right now because they're also standing up to the anti-DI backlash. I would say a couple of examples are Costco and Apple, certainly. I mean, Costco, I have not been a Costco member for a number of years because now I live in a place where I don't have a car, so it's not that convenient. But I was a Costco member for many years, and I loved it. You go there, and I've been there recently. My daughter and her family live in Salt Lake City, and we were at Costco not long ago, and it's just like people there. You can tell that the people that work there are satisfied. You ask them for help, they're ready to help you. It's very different from, and I'm not going to, I don't want to say anything negative about other chains, but other places where you go and it takes you 20 minutes just to find somebody that can help you.
Yeah.
And then they feel like you're imposing on them because they're asking you questions. And so Costco has been known for bucking the trend in a lot of ways. They pay higher salaries than virtually anybody else in their space, in the retail space. And they do a fantastic job of that. And you see that because their returns have been fantastic. They have basically they've outgrown most of the financial indices in the marketplace. If you invested in Costco 20 years ago, you would have made a lot more money than if you invested in the S&P 500, for example. So that's one example. Apple is another example, and what they realized, and I think they were kind of the leaders in the space, is to acknowledge that when you design for people that have either disabilities or other kinds of special needs, you end up designing better products for everyone. And there are, many examples of situations where, like, TV captions. I turn on captions on the TV all the time because sometimes it's noisy, sometimes I can't hear very well, and that's something that was initially supposedly developed for people that had problems with hearing, right? And so Apple embodied that not only in the products, but it turns out the way that they set up their sales points. And I happen to know a woman who, Denise Young Smith, who used to be their global head of HR, and then she became involved with DI. But one of her main contributions was that she was behind a lot of the decisions that led to the Apple employees being incredibly satisfied people, and at least certainly on the retail side. And so they've been also one of the companies that has come back and said this whole anti-DI rhetoric is wrong. And we're going to continue to do what we're doing because we know that it's very powerful and it's very beneficial, and we've seen it ourselves. So those are certainly two examples of very large companies. I see that in my work a lot with smaller companies as well. Companies that just by making a difference in how they approach the way that their people are treated, see better results, not just internally, but also in terms of literally the money that they bring home at the end of the month or at the end of the year is greater because of the fact that they treat their people better.
So let's go back to that question about the third grade. Let's go to your childhood. What did you want to be when you were a kid? What was your dream job?
So when I was a little kid, I wanted to be a marine biologist, and I loved animals. I had this. My parents growing up in Italy, there used to be this thing where every week you would go to the newsstand and buy a very thin magazine that was about animals, and each issue was different. And over time, you collected them, and then you could get them, bound them into an encyclopedia. And I did that. It took me like I don't know, like 5 years or something. So I loved animals. I wanted to be a marine biologist. And then what happened is that I started to realize that I loved mechanical things. I could fix anything. I was the kind of kid that at 9 years old, I would take apart the vacuum cleaner and sometimes actually be able to put it back together. Not always, but always loved working with my hands and building things. And eventually, I fell in love with cars. And I spent I when I was 17, I took money that my parents had sent me for. I just moved to the States. I'd finished 1 year of college, and then I took money that my parents had sent me for tuition. And instead, I started an auto body shop with a friend of mine. We were fixing cars. We fixed engines. We fixed the body of the cars. And so as I started to study it, I went into engineering, and I really loved computers and engineering and cars. And I thought someday I want to be an automotive engineer. And then at the very end of my undergraduate, I took a course on a kind of an engineer's perspective on how the brain works. And it blew my mind quite literally. So I fell in love with the brain, and I ended up doing most of my master's degree and my PhD in an area called computational neuroscience, which is literally trying to understand from a computational perspective how the brain works. How is it that I can do things like move my hands, and being Italian, I do it a lot more than most people. And how do we see? How do we speak? How do we, remember? So I spent the extended part of my professional life first as a professor, well, first as a graduate student, and then as a professor, working on understanding the brain and figuring out how to apply that to real world problems. And then finally, the last thing that happened is that I started to take similar ideas to apply them, rather than thinking, how do a lot of neurons enable you, when you put a whole bunch of neurons together, you are able to see and speak. I moved that up to one layer and say, well, how do you get a lot of people to do things like build companies and societies and cities and things of that sort? And that's actually, I joke with people. I'm 62 now, and I started to do this work 10 years ago in diversity and inclusion, which was based on the same kind of computational ideas. And I joke with people that it took me 53 years to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. And so it was a bit of a weird thing: marine biology, cars, automotive engineering, brain science, and then eventually, diversity and inclusion. But to me, it all makes sense in retrospect, but it's a little bit weird.
Yeah. So was it always a dream for you to come to America?
No, not at all. The way that I came to the States was that my father was a professor of chemistry at universities in Italy, and when I was really little, they came to my mom and my dad came to the States on sabbatical for some time, and they thought, when the kids are big, we want to bring them back. So my thoughts of America were just like, whatever, it's there. We watch movies and we know about it, but it was not a big deal. And then we came in 1975 on vacation, and then in 78 we came back. My father was a visiting professor just for a couple of months at the University of Santa Barbara, University of California at Santa Barbara. And at the end of the period, because of the way that I finished 2 years of high school in Italy. And because school here started a lot earlier, like here, school started in late August, and in Italy, it started in October. And so my parents were like, "Hey, why don't you enroll in just to see what high school is like here?" And I went to the local high school, Dos Pueblos High School in Goleta, California, and I just outside Santa Barbara. And I realized that I could take much more interesting courses. I could take math and electrical engineering and computer science, and I could play water polo. And I was like, why would I go back to Italy? And I thought, well, I'll stay here and then go back. And then I was like, well, I'll finish my degree, I'll get a degree and go back. And then it's like, oh, I'll get married and have kids and then go back. And I never went back. So now I'm fortunate that I can spend a lot of time. But to me, America was never really, it wasn't like a dream. It was like I stumbled upon it. It was almost coincidental. I saw an opportunity once I was here to do something that I would not have been able to do back home. But it was much more serendipitous than a lot of people that come here, all googly eyed because they want to come to America.
It's interesting because I'm on the other end of that Italian bloodline. My great grandparents came to Ellis Island, so my dad was full-blooded Italian, born in Brooklyn, raised in Long Island, and of all of the generations, no one went back to Italy, and I finally did. I had a pen pal in high school that I wrote for years, and I ended up going back to I think it was in 2000. I went and saw Rome. Rome is just a place of magic that I had no idea existed. Um, and thankfully, I threw a coin in the Trevi Fountain. But I've seen Venice, I've seen all of those spots, and it's just the flow of life, the feeling. And everybody I talk to, they always extol the virtues of Italy. They're like, when I went through Europe, you have to go to Italy, and I agree. In fact, I was in the back of a water taxi in Venice on the morning of September 11th, 2001.
Oh, wow.
So I
Wow.
I ended up after a few days, my flight didn't exist from Paris back to Kansas City, but I ended up going to Vernazza, the poor man's Riviera, Cinque Terre,
Yep.
and it was unbelievable. Like the best place in the planet at that point to be at. So
Yeah.
anyway, a
Yeah.
lot
Yeah,
of
no, I know
wonderful.
that area very well. My grandparents used to have a house in Sestri Levante, which is just north of the Cinque Terre. So I know the Cinque
Yeah,
Terre region quite well. It's spectacular. And Italy, one of the things that having, I was born there, grew up there, I lived in multiple cities, which is kind of unusual. Most Italians stay put, but
yeah,
because of my dad's work, I was born in Milan, then I moved to a town called L'Aquila, then I moved also a year in Genoa. But I've traveled a lot in Italy, and ever since as an adult going back, whenever I go, I try to take the time to go travel. That place is amazing. Like you can go 20 miles and discover something completely new, completely
totally.
different. You can go from, Cinque Terre, you're in the Mediterranean. I remember one summer, or not summer, it was like late fall. I was swimming in the Mediterranean near Genova, just outside of the Cinque Terre, And later like at 5 p.m., I got in my car. I drove up because I was doing something in Switzerland. And that evening, I spent the night in a hotel on a mountain pass with 10 feet of snow outside. And it's like, where else can you go from swimming in the Mediterranean to being surrounded by 10 feet of snow driving
Yeah.
in 3 hours? It's really an amazing country, and I feel very blessed. And the fact that right now I have the opportunity, and I have a place in Italy and a place here. So when I go, it's like I bring a empty suitcase and I bring it back with like a grocery store full of Italian food. But Italy, I definitely recommend anybody that has not been. It's such an amazing place to see.
When I went to Rome, it was kind of on a whim, and it was before cell phones and any of that. I had a camera and I just had rolls of film. And I remember I stayed right outside of Vatican City, and I got lost. I went to the Colosseum. I was so hungry to see the Forum and the Colosseum that I got lost. And my Italian wasn't good. And I got into some sketchy areas, and I finally made it back. And I remember I literally fell in front of the the apartment that I was staying in and kissed the floor. And I was so excited to be there. And it was, but the Vatican City was amazing. I remember walking around there at night, and I went to a Vivaldi concerto that was down the way. And my dad used to listen to Pavarotti all the time, and it was a very emotional thing for him. And I finally got opera. That concert, like feeling the fact that I was on Italian soil watching something that magnanimous, it was unbelievable.
Wonderful. Yeah,
So,
I know a lot of people. Most people that go to Italy come back with very good memories, and usually with a couple of extra pounds too
yeah,
from
right, you
all the
do.
food.
Uh-huh. The food's good. The food's definitely good.
Yeah.
So, who's been a hero for you? Who's been somebody that's motivated your career and what you've done in your life?
I'm gonna say something maybe a little bit. I'm not gonna speak about a single person,
Right.
although there is a few that I could think about. But when I started to work in this space, and I talk about this because even though I did a lot of work before, I had a lot of friends and partners that were very instrumental in a lot of things that I've done. But I realized something very interesting, which is that in the United States of America, there is a whole history with, slavery and whatnot. And I had the privilege of starting to work with a number of Black women. And what I have to say, just as a whole, if I had to say what inspires me, is Black women in this country. And the reason for that is because I have had the privilege of working with people, and I can name names, people like, well, I've already mentioned, for example, Denise Young Smith. I've never actually worked with her, but I've gotten to know her reasonably well. She's just an amazing human being. She just wrote a book called When We're Seen that I highly recommend. It just came out a few months ago. I worked with a woman whose name is Gilda Barbino, who is now president of Olin College of Engineering. And when we met, she was the dean of the School of Engineering at City College of New York. I was an adjunct there. We started to work together. This woman has more awards and more prizes and not just that, but like she's done things. She's probably the most amazing human being that I've ever met in terms of achievements. And she's just somebody that most people don't even know exists. And I have to say, I've worked with so many other Black women that have come to realize that to be able to be successful as a Black person in general, but as a Black woman in particular, in any professional field in the United States, you have to be head and shoulders above everybody else. And I can tell you, there have been a number of them that have been such an inspiration to me because I see these people and I see how, unfortunately, in many professional contexts, they're just kind of ignored and they're invisible. They're not treated properly. Imagine you're the leader of an organization, you walk into a room for a meeting with some customers and they assume that you're there to bring them coffee. And that happens all the time. And those are just like the superficial things. There is, much deeper things. So I have to say, for the last 10 years, I've come to appreciate, if I have to say, a group, not a single individual, but a group that really has impacted me profoundly has been Black women in this country.
So what is it that gets you up every day to do the work that you do? You're dealing with heavy things, but you also have to develop yourself as a human being. What is that collective energy every day for you to do what you do at the top of your game?
I'm so lucky because I feel like my entire life has been driven by serendipity more than by a North Star.
Yeah.
I've always been one of these people that I've found myself in a lot of situations where I was doing really fascinating work that I loved without really having to go out and look for it. I've done things like I've been an interpreter for a professional cycling team during the World Championship in 1984 in Colorado Springs when Italy won first and third place. I've been, as I said, an auto mechanic. I've traveled many parts of the world. I've had a lot of opportunities. And when I said that I didn't know what I wanted to do until I grew up, until I was 53. It's because at that point I had literally this light bulb moment where I figured out how to bring together my passion for let's call it diversity and inclusion, but really my passion for treating people more fairly and doing something good for society with my work. And now I work in a space where I know that the work that I'm doing can actually have an impact. It can actually make a difference. It can actually make people's lives better, and it can create really, really good economic outcomes for people. And so to me, that like every morning that I get up, I'm always very busy. I'm involved with, I have both a nonprofit and a for-profit organization. I just finished writing a book. Well, I published a book in late September of this past year. So I've been really, really busy, but every morning I'm super excited. Like I get up, I never need an alarm. I'm always up running around. I always have a great opportunity, and I get to meet great people like yourself, because people are interested in the work that I do. It exposes me to a ton of people, and not just Black women. I do meet fascinating people from all walks of life, from all different countries. And it's really, I cannot tell you how fortunate I am that I'm able to do work that I love and I'm able to do something that actually has an impact.
So if you had a dream tonight, ran into a younger version of you, an 18, 20-year-old version, and you could give that version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've lived, the wisdom you've accumulated over the time, what advice would you give?
I made, I think well, I don't know that I would call it a mistake, but I was one of these people where I've never really cared about money, about making money. I came from fairly modest means, not poor, but certainly, I would say middle class at best. But because of my parents, because of a number of reasons, my attitude with money was always that it's like, yeah, money is the kind of thing that if I need it, I'll find a way, I'll get a job or whatever. And I have to say, one thing that I'm realizing now is that there are opportunities for things that I wish that I had more money to do. Like I wish that I had more money to, I've been dreaming about creating kind of my own think tank where I could use some of the science that I'm using specifically now for diversity and inclusion in corporations and use those ideas and apply them in other ways, like for politics, for policymaking, for international things, for supporting development in third world countries. And the fact that I was so lackadaisical about building up wealth was a mistake. I wish that I'd been a bit more careful. And, I'm not a greedy person at all, but I realize now that I feel like I'm missing out on some important opportunities to create value around some of the ideas that I have because I don't have the financial means at this particular time to make them come to life. And I've also been a lifelong entrepreneur. I've not had a successful exit. I had one company that was doing really well that unfortunately blew up during COVID, and so that was kind of the end of that. But so I wish that I'd been in a slightly more stable, more robust financial situation because I think that that would allow me to achieve a lot more than even though I feel like I'm achieving a lot, I wish that I could achieve a lot more.
So of everything that you've done and accomplished and evolved into in your career and your life, what are you ultimately the proudest of?
I think that I'm proudest of just in general in my it's kind of a weird thing, but I'm proud of a lot of specific things, but I love the fact that I know that the day that I'm on my deathbed and I look back on my life, I will feel like I've done some really good things. I've done a lot of interesting things. I've had a variety of, I've met some amazing people in my life. I've made really good friends. I've not really done harm to people, just something that kind of matters a lot. And I feel like I can look back on my life and be satisfied with literally every single thing that I've done. Like I would not, as much as I say, yeah, I wish that I'd been more careful with accumulating some wealth. The fact of the matter is, I wouldn't really change any part of my life, and I'm very, very proud of that because I know that a lot of people go around carrying regrets and things like that. And for me, being able to say that I literally have, there is like stupid little things that I wish that I hadn't done, but I would say that's probably in general what I'm most proud of is I feel very, very good about who I am and where I am and how I got here.
So everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, everyone that knows you, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think I see myself as a citizen of the world, somebody that has a wide variety of interests. Sometimes I like the term Renaissance man because I view that in the context of I have dabbled in so many different spaces. I mean, I've studied how the retina works. I've worked on cars. I've worked on computers. I've been an engineer. I did a big project in geotechnical engineering. I was a translator for bicycle teams and other organizations. And it's, I would say, Renaissance man with a taste for life, with a taste for variety is one of the biggest things. I can say one funny thing is people say, the expression, a jack of all trades and master of none. is considered by many to be kind of an insult. To me, that's a compliment. It's like
Yeah.
I'm a nearly a master of many, many trades, and really just love. To me, that's just one of the greatest things about me is that I can fit into any context, any environment, any conversation, and I just really I think that's what really characterizes me.
So in your line of work, you have to deal with heavy things. We're getting ready to go into a new era here on Monday, which is kind of odd. It's Martin Luther King Day and the inauguration. As we move into this new chapter, a new era of America following a pandemic, are you hopeful for humanity? What's your feeling?
I have mixed feelings. I'm hopeful. I think that it's going to be, we talked about the pendulum swinging. I think it's going to keep swinging a little bit more, but I think that people are starting to realize that the counter pendulum has swung too far, and it's time to bring things back. However, there is a general broad undercurrent that is pushing things more toward more conservative ideals, which are, in a way, they make my life a bit more difficult. But I'm optimistic because I think that in a way there was too much buzz, and 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 I don't want to offend anybody, but I feel like a lot of the buzz around DI didn't have the substance behind it that it should have. And as often happens when you have these bubbles that burst, what ends up happening is that a lot of people lose their businesses and companies shut down. But in the end, some of the best ones stick around and become very successful. That's what happened. I lived through the internet bubble in 2000, 2001, and people predicted that, oh, the internet is going to die, nobody's going to survive. And in the end, the biggest companies in the world today were all companies that were born in that period or that became very successful in that period. And so I'm optimistic that things will rise out of the ashes, if you will, but I don't know how quickly that's going to happen. I'm a little bit concerned that it may take a couple of years before we start to see a real turnaround. But meanwhile, we're keeping busy and trying to do what we can.
So if anyone wants to reach out, they want to learn more about what you're doing, any of the good business in your world, where can they go?
I would say aleria.tech. So it's aleria.tech. That's my company's website. If you look me up on LinkedIn, it's my favorite means of communication these days. And yeah, and also I have a TED Talk. If you go to TED.com and you do a search for my name, Paolo Gaudiano, you will see I gave a talk last year. There's now on the main TED site that talks about what DI has gone wrong and how to do it right. And then you can find my book on Amazon. So it's called Measuring Inclusion. Those are four easy ways to get a hold of me. Luckily, with a name like Paolo Gaudiano, unless you misspell it, there is not a lot of me, a lot of
Yeah,
us out there. So you should be pretty easy to find me.
absolutely. This has been fascinating. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your time and story. Best of luck with everything.
Thank you, Joe. Grazie mille. Really appreciate it.
Grazie.